IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. I'm your host Amit Kumar, a research analyst with the Takshashila Institution's Indo-Pacific Studies program. And today I'm joined with my colleague Anushka Saxena. Welcome, Anushka.
Thanks, Amit. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Anushka. So today we thought we'll talk about AI. So AI is one of the frontal technologies that every country seems to be racing against each other to have some sort of dominance over it. And even before it became a thing of contestation between the two leading economies of the world, the US and China, AI was thought that it would be the central core or the core that will drive the fourth generation of industrial revolution, right? And the geopolitical contestation between the US and China has only given a fillip to this research on AI, and every country seems to be learning ways and devising means as to how to control it and how to best use it to their advantage. In this context, a new book, a quite critically acclaimed book, was launched, "The Four Battlegrounds," the by Paul Scharre, and this book is something that has been a lot of people have talked about it, and Anushka, our guest today, has gone through the book and has also written a master review on the book that was recently published with Indian Public Policy Review, the Takshila Institution's flagship journal. So, Anushka, my first question to is, would you be able to kindly explain to our listeners as to what this book is all about? What are the broad things that the book covers, and what are the four battlegrounds that the author talks about?
Right. Thank you so much for that, Amit. So, yes, it's definitely a critically acclaimed book. I think Paul Shar also had the distinction of being listed as one of the top 100 names in artificial intelligence in 2023, and his book is basically second of two he has written on artificial intelligence research. The first one is Army of None, which is about autonomy in military AI, and this one is Four Battlegrounds, which takes a broader view picture and covers almost all aspects of artificial intelligence, its uses and deployment, may it be in how the private sector in the US approaches the subject, to how the Chinese party state has used artificial intelligence to conduct surveillance in regions like Xinjiang and has adopted the technology to make its authoritarian regime more repressive. Also, the four battlegrounds in specific refer to data, talent, compute, and institutions. These are the four critical elements of artificial intelligence technology where the geopolitical quest for supremacy is being fought. So, of course, the first element is data, which is the information, the training sets that go into the kind of development of an artificial intelligence model, like the most famous one that we know of, right? The large language model that we know as ChatGPT. So the amount of text-based data that goes into training that model to be able to predict the next word when we ask it a question. And how can industries and governments invest in it, and what is the right source or form of data? That's one of the four battlegrounds he discusses. The second one is, of course, compute. You cannot, and Paul Shar says this, you cannot train an AI model simply by magic. You have to use computing power in the form of processing units like graphic processing units to be able to train it. And so data has to be complemented with solid compute power. The third aspect is talent. And again, in his analysis of talent, he draws a distinction between the US led ecosystem on artificial intelligence and the one led by China. The Chinese system is a little more authoritarian and repressive, but the US one is relatively more innovative and knowledge based, right? This is not to say China does not focus on innovation, but there are set guidelines. There is no freedom to fail, as you can see in, say, the American system. And so, in this regard, he says that US becomes a very attractive location for talent to pool in. And even though China publishes massive amounts of papers on basic and applied research in artificial intelligence, Paul Scharre argues, and to a great extent I agree, that in subjects like artificial intelligence, quality matters over quantity. And finally, he talks about institutions, which is about the development of governmental and private industry capacity to be able to collect data, carry out compute, and deploy talent, right? And strengthening of institutions, funding of research and development, all of these are aspects that he covers, right? And of course, he calls them four battlegrounds because the context of the book is the competition around artificial intelligence. Of course, research scholars study AI as a technology in and of itself, but the focus of the book is largely in the context of the geopolitical flux that the world is undergoing and how artificial intelligence has become core and central to it, along with other technologies like quantum, 5G, so on and so forth. Hence the name Four Battlegrounds.
That's fascinating. Never thought, one could think of AI in these as an aggregation of these four key pillars. So I'll come to you individually for every pillars that you just discussed and what the author discusses in the book. Let's get to data first. So data as this is an information age wherein we see a lot of influx and outflux of information, a lot of data that is created by every internet user, and correctly, data is now regarded as the new oil, right? Something which every government, every multinational company involved in this, the big tech companies, they derive their revenues of using data to their advantage, right? So what are the key concepts or key frameworks that the author discusses, and why is it why the author discusses or describes these four pillars as battlegrounds? So what are some of the things that the author brings out and challenges that the author brings out in the book with regard to data first?
Right. Thanks for that, Amit. So, of course, the reason why this is the battleground and also the author's main contention is because there is the assumption that because China has the largest population in the world, it can supersede the US or the US led ecosystem in artificial intelligence in terms of the availability of data, which is step one to creating and training a model, an AI model, right? And so the author's challenge is precisely this, right? China has 900 million internet users, India has roughly 750 million users, and the European Union and US are somewhere around 400 million and 290 million respectively. And so the prima facie understanding would be that because China and India have such large internet using populations, that the two countries will naturally have an advantage in the use of data. However, the author's contention is, and this is absolutely legitimate, which is two parts, right? One is that major US technology firms like Facebook and YouTube, they have collectively over 5 billion users, right? So the US population is hardly constraining them from collecting data. And so the competition here isn't between the populations of the two countries, but rather the amount of data governments can access legitimately. this, and of course, this throws up all kinds of privacy issues, which is why Google and Facebook have been under the radar with the US Congress. But yes, availability of data isn't necessarily a cause of concern, shouldn't be a cause of concern for the US. The second part of this is that diversity of data matters, right? Even if Chinese citizens' data is collected in large quantities, it's not necessary that an AI algorithm that is trained on that specific data set will be functional or deployed in the right manner across regions and across events, right? For example, if a drone that is trained on facial recognition data of Chinese citizens, if it's deployed in a war zone in, say, Syria or somewhere else in the Middle East, it will not be able to distinguish between the data it has been trained on versus the facial data that it is now accessing on the battlefield. And that lack of diversity is precisely why artificial intelligence mechanisms in the past have labeled people of black skin color as gorillas, right? And so there is it's not just about how much data a country can collect or a government has access to, but also how much of it can genuinely replace real world data and imitate it, keeping in mind the diversity, right? At the same time, there is also the advancement in synthetic data, which is using artificial intelligence to create new data which hasn't been taken from real world examples. And it's been taken from real world examples, but it has been modified in a way in the form of pictures that haven't been taken from real world cameras or facial recognition softwares, right? And this synthetic data, it has now been deployed to train the AlphaGo Zero updated version of the game, which has in the past been known for superhuman performance against some of the top AlphaGo players in the world, right? And so synthetic data is now being used to play algorithm. Of course, synthetic data has a major challenge, which is that the more artificial intelligence is trained on synthetic data, the more it means that the data AI models put out is synthetic. And this kind of creates a positive feedback loop where the feeding in of synthetic data leads to bringing out of synthetic data, and then it becomes more and more difficult to know what data is real and what data is not, which is a problem we're now starting to face in the real world, right? But yes, the author gives a very interesting example of ImageNet. This is a platform that has almost 1000 photos of every object that you put in a name for, and ImageNet has slowly become a very important tool to train data algorithm models on. Of course, with the evolution of artificial intelligence, there more and more specialized such platforms are emerging, and it remains to be seen how synthetic data alters the information ecosystem that we are used to.
Okay, so as I understand it, the key factors, the key issues of significance that underpins this data pillar of the artificial intelligence, not just that you need a large amount of data to train your large language models and artificial intelligence in turn, but you also require huge diversity in terms of what kind of data that you employ to train your LLMs, right? And the another challenge that has emerged, and this is a challenge which actually plagues the current AI ecosystem now that we are actually seeing that there's emerging there's an emergence of I would say, like, to an extent, two two separate ecosystems wherein AI is being trained, because especially because China has closed its market to the uh, foreign companies wherein they could gain actually have access to data, and especially because the kind of law that have come in China, which bars and prevents movement of data of the domestic from the domestic market for use by the foreign companies, right? So that restricts the access to data that these foreign companies would have, and vice
Right.
versa, because now the US and the other emerging its allies are seeing that this is going to be one of the battlegrounds. They need to safeguard their interests, and therefore some sort of separation in the ecosystem is coming about. So there are problems. So that restricts the amount of data that either of the two ecosystems could train their models on, and that also then takes out the diversity, the kind of diversity that you were referring to earlier. That there will be a problem in training these large language models because there would be an absence of diversity, and also the fact that because a lot of these data are generated in these so-called first world countries where which have large number of internet users, while countries in Latin America or Africa would not have that many internet users, and therefore that kind of imparts some sort of distortion, as we're
Right.
referring to. And the third point relating to synthetic data, that AI itself is creating data based on what it is learning. So it becomes difficult to kind of separate what is real and so. Do you see any instance of how this is creating a problem in training of the AI model?
So synthetic data in specific doesn't create a problem for the training of the AI model. It's just that because sometimes to train an AI model, the amount of data that would be required would be so huge that it will be difficult to collect real world data of that kind of diversity, right? That's why synthetic data is used, and when we see models like AlphaGo Zero, right, which we want that they attain superhuman performance without any human training data at all, right? So what it would do so what AlphaGo Zero was trained to do was it was asked to play about 5 million games against itself. And what that does is it creates synthetic data because there are no human moves or moves from human experts that are feeded into the ecosystem, but rather the AI software is kind of encouraged to create its own data sets based on its processing, right? And so that doesn't necessarily have a problem until and unless it's, say, for example, visual data or textual data, right? Because as more and more non-real world and synthetic data goes into the ecosystem, what it puts out also is based on its analysis of synthetic data, and that can create problems for information.
Right.
However, sometimes and many times actually synthetic data can be very valuable for simulations that we
Right,
cannot
right,
conduct
right,
in the real
right.
world, and need to be done in an AI mode, right? So we have Waymo's example, which is a self-driven car company, and they used synthetic data to augment real world data and simulate about 10 million driving miles every single day. And what that did was it made their autonomous car function better, right? So that way synthetic data can be helpful.
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break.
So let me come to the second pillar of, or the second battleground which the author discusses in the book, and that is compute. And of course, a large chunk of what the compute capability that would come from would come from the semiconductors, right? Semiconductors and chips, and something which has become, I think, the face of the modern the tech war that is now taking shape between the US and China again. So semiconductors are going to be at the heart of any technology, any form of tech war that would happen, because they contribute significantly to computing power, and then therefore the AI as well, right? But lately, what we have observed is that, especially, and now since we just witnessed the first anniversary of the October 7 resolutions, which the U.S. State Department like came up with to put harsh restrictions on China's access to key technologies, key semiconductor technologies, which would, and to keep, so that they could prevent China from gaining access to those leading technologies, and thereby keep China at least a decade behind in terms of capabilities. with that of the US, right? So how does this impact in this in between? If you look at the competition with the US and China, how consequential and significant is this? These measures are in shaping the competition in the domain of AI.
Definitely, because compute is the hardware part of training an AI algorithm. It's equally as important as, say, data which is fed into the software, right? And of course, no data can be stored or fed in without the appropriate hardware. And semiconductors, chip performance, they've become key measures and pillars to assess computing power. And this is also why, when we refer to cloud computing as a differentiating factor in let's say artificial intelligence supremacy, we see that these American companies like Google, Microsoft, or Amazon, they possess huge cloud computing infrastructure. And how that helps is that enables fast training of deep neural networks. It enables excellent machine learning, and ultimately the making of better artificial intelligence models. And of course, the semiconductor export controls have an immense significance in this regard, because they disrupt the compute power capabilities of China, right? And we see that American firms already account for about 65% of the global fabless market. And now there is an increasing inward focus also on manufacturing chips, the downstream of the supply chain within the US. And what this will, of course, do is it will impact the Chinese ecosystem, because artificial intelligence chips are becoming more specialized, right? In training models, it's not just any semiconductor chip. Now, firms are looking at AI specialized chips, and companies like Intel are also manufacturing them internally, right? And of course, this has implications for China's quest for supremacy in artificial intelligence. But yes, just on like understanding compute in specific and cloud computing, before I read Paul Scharre's book, a lot of these things were just terms, right, that are very difficult to comprehend. And so, compute is the hardware including data centers, storage, scalability, security, and maintenance infrastructure that is required to train deep neural networks and ultimately prepare an AI model, right? And Paul Shah brings out a very important point regarding Rock's law, right? So we understand semiconductors from the perspective of Moore's law, right? That over time, the number of semiconductors required would increase significantly in algorithmic progression, and at the same time, their size will become smaller and smaller. And that is complemented by Rock's law, which is that the more semiconductors are produced and the smaller their size becomes, establishing foundries and fabless design institutions will become more and more expensive, right? So now, and establishing a basic foundry costs anywhere between 10 and 20 billion dollars. And the contention Paul Shah makes here is that over time, as the quest for supremacy in the battleground, that is compute, goes on, it'll only be governments that will be able to reach their deep pockets and push innovation in compute power and expanding on compute intensive processes. And so, his primary argument is that government should look at R&D, not just US but also China, in how to expand on compute, because companies like Microsoft and Google are already invested in a lot of these capabilities. But as Rock's law states, over time they will become more and more expensive to maintain. And at a point, it'll only be government budgets that can take care of them. Now, this is for now, it seems like a stretch to claim that, because, of course, some of these firms have access to more data and more funds than many of the budgetary components of governments, and more than the budgets of smaller countries, right? That said, this is a trend that remains to be observed.
I mean, even I do not. I mean, I would look at this claim that even that Scharre's claim that the only government would be able to fund the ventures, because initially it was the private firms that actually came up with that actually managed to commercialize it. And even though that they were uh, making miniaturized semiconductors in every 2 years, they were able to drive the cost down on their own. So even though the technology becomes specialized, commercialization is a significant commercialization of the technology plays a significant part in moving the technology forward, because unless you cannot commercialize it, there's no incentive to innovate, right? But okay, now let's come on to the third battleground the author talks about, that is talent. So what does the author make of the talent? Is the talent at the level which is actually required to get on with the progresses that one anticipates in the domain of AI? And how does the author also encounters any fragmentation in the talent pool that the various countries are trying to trying to source the talent from?
Thanks. So, obviously, the author highlights deep fragmentation in the talent ecosystem and also argues, and I think his evidence supports this well, that the US is indeed leading the battle in artificial intelligence talent against the Chinese ecosystem. It's because American institutions, they are a major draw for AI researchers from around the world, and of the top 15 institutions that are publishing deep learning research, 13 are American, and only one, which is the Tsinghua University, is Chinese, right? And the reason for this is that US is the home of the American dream, where a lot of folks want to come in, use government funds and push to conduct both basic and applied research, and work with some of the top kind of AI in firms that invest in artificial intelligence, like the Allen Institute, and of course Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, right? And so some of these opportunities are not available in China. And so even though China overtook the United States in the number of artificial intelligence publications in 2017 itself, like I said in the starting of the episode, this is a field that is so risky and technicality intensive that quality matters over quantity. And I think even though the US comes second to the Chinese publications on this, the quality push is significantly higher because of talent retention in the US. And US is also top destination for AI researchers from around the world, because a lot of them pursue their schooling or say undergraduate degrees in China, but they will always move to American institutions for higher education like masters and PhD programs, because they feel that the affiliations they can gain there after in a placement context, right, which is something that concerns all students. They feel that they would have better opportunities with Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, and MIT, because they will be more
Right.
open to conducting quality research. Of course, even though there are other fault lines and fragments in the US led ecosystem, talent definitely remains the US's kind of key standing point in this.
True, and the fact that one is an authoritarian system and the other is a democratic. I mean, the other ecosystem led by US is a democratic one, which has always historically welcomed immigration. And I mean, China is more likely to rely on its domestic pool of talent, and at most that the overseas Chinese that are working elsewhere, right? But the US here has the advantage of sourcing talent from across the world. So long there is ample. There's no doubt with regard to their association with or their collaboration with the Chinese, right?
Yeah, and I think there is a challenge that the US ecosystem is now facing. Is yeah, of course, they are closing down on talent coming in from China. A lot of difficulties with regards to visas and affiliations of professors that have already been working with some of the American institutions, and them being asked to leave and send back. These issues are, of course, gripping the US AI ecosystem, but also now some of the talent moving to the US is also concerned about the concentration of cloud computing infrastructure with um, some of the biggest firms like OpenAI, Google, and Nvidia,
Right.
right? And so here the US government may have an important role to play, because there needs to be a push for moving away from solely corporate backed labs to research deployment and development in startups and incubator ecosystems. And so that's definitely that's definitely an incentive that the US will have to create to continue to dominate the battleground in talent.
All right. And finally, coming on to the fourth battleground, that is institutions. Given that in this bifurcation that or the fragmentation that we see in the current global ecosystem, that one is led by the US, the other China is trying to create its own ecosystem by keeping the foreign entities out of its by creating a firewall and keeping them out of its domestic market. The fact that one is an authoritarian system and the other is a democratic led open and free ecosystem, what roles do you see the institutions as according to the author? Do institutions play in making this in contributing to the aims and objectives of these two respective countries?
Of course, that's a very important question, or rather, sets of questions. And there are a lot of moving parts involved in understanding what kind of dividends institutions and capacity building in institutions is reaping for the two ecosystems, right? So, in the 1960s and 70s, when the US kind of put in a lot of federal expenditure in research and development because of the Cold War going on, there wasn't a lot of flourishing of the private sector. But as the effects of the Cold War waned, and R&D funding declined over time, the US R&D private companies kind of picked up the slack and filled in the vacuum, right? And so one of the most dominant set of institutions in the United States now is the AI industry, which is dominated by corporates and corporate backed labs, right? And so that's definitely an institutional area that the US is dominating in. And now the US Department of Defense, which is looking to deploy lethal autonomy in artificial intelligence backed weapons, is seeking to collaborate with artificial intelligence firms like Google to be able to deploy some of the AI they have developed in their military systems. However, this has also created a challenge because, like you said, the US is a democracy, and private sector companies and their employees are strictly against autonomy in AI weapons, right? And that's why we also see in 2019, Liz O'Sullivan of Clarify sent a resignation letter to her boss claiming that she did not want Clarify to collaborate with the US Department of Defense so that there will never be lethal autonomy in drones, which can be significantly challenging in the battlefield, right? And it can go either way. And so in this regard, this institutional capacity that the military in the United States has been seeking to fulfill has been kind of plagued by some of the democratic or the human rights related ideals private sector companies are holding. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is an aspect to consider. On the other hand, because in China a lot of it is state controlled, there is a great push that is given to artificial intelligence innovation units, private sector firms, and of course the Central Military Commission to make strides in AI innovation, deployment, and development. And because state owned enterprises more or less follow the will of the party state, we're seeing funding and incentives, and especially there's a super tax, which is 100% tax relief for SOEs that are investing in R&D in artificial intelligence. And so China is replicating a lot of the US models and doing better in some places, right? And the challenge they face as an authoritarian regime is that, of course, there are major policy barriers to entering the field, which is why startups and incubators cannot do it, and only large state-owned enterprises are able to pick up the threads and the ropes on AI innovation. But also, AI innovation has to be balanced with regulatory interventionism, with doctrinal norms regarding using AI to only to respect the party state and its institutions. And so that regulatory interventionism is something that the private sector has to take into account while innovating. So overall, both systems have some challenges, and it remains to be seen how government interventions evolve, both in the US and in China, to adapt to some of them.
Yeah, right. But if you ask me, I mean, if I have to give a verdict on which system or which ecosystem leads, if you compare them across these four parameters, even if institutions is something where we could have a 50-50 proportion to both the players here, I think US comfortably leads in this battleground 3-0, given the advantage it has in compute, talent, and access to large and diverse data. And what the problem is this creates for the Chinese is that they get to be playing the catching up game, wherein US, given the advantage of the gap it has or it has created with the Chinese, it gets to work more and research on frontal technologies, right? And yeah, this was a fascinating conversation, Anushka. Thank you for gracing our listeners with these important issues of debates that underpins the current AI technology. Thank you so much.
Right. Thanks so much, Amit. And of course, huge thanks to Paul Scharre for bringing some of the walls down on how AI is researched. I recommend his book to all of our listeners. It's not entirely jargon free, but it's supplemented by a great big glossary and reference list. He says a lot of difficult things to understand in a very easy storytelling format. And so, it would be the best book out there to understand the subject if you'd like to. So thanks, Amit, and thank you to our listeners for tuning into another episode of All Things Policy.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.